Hi, welcome to A New African, where we tell our stories without changing the narrative. While looking at the future with optimism, we also aspire to remain relevant in our present times.
Hello, welcome to episode 2. With me today is our guest, Dr. Molapo. Welcome.
Thank you.
And Mani, great to have you back. You were on holidays.
It's good. I was taking a bit of rest from the world, trying to recharge them batteries. So yeah, I'm fully recovered now.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. So how long do you think those batteries will run for? Another 12 months?
I don't know. With COVID, maybe till next month, but we'll see.
Great. Awesome. Well, while you were away, we had an amazing episode run, the first episode ever. And if you haven't seen that episode, please click out of this right now and go back and read that. Watch that and catch yourself up, because there's some amazing things that we talked about. Did you know that the first ever university in the world was in Africa?
I didn't know it till I read the book. Yeah. I was just like, that's amazing.
There you go.
It's there.
Yeah. So I'm feeling like I'm very knowledgeable now.
Yeah, true.
Right.
Yeah.
And what a legacy.
Absolutely.
Something to be absolutely proud of. We also spoke about the richest man that ever lived, and there has been no other. And he was an African.
Not Bill Gates.
No, not Bill Gates, no, by far. Sorry, Bill Gates, no offense. But this man was actually an African king. And what was his net worth again?
Something like 400 billion
US dollars. 400 billion US dollars. That's amazing. And to imagine that he was an African, I feel rich just talking about him. Right?
We are even richer. You'll see when we get deeper today.
I know, right?
Far much more richer.
Yes, absolutely. You're in for a real treat. So, come along, walk with us through this journey. We also spoke about Queen Nzinga, an Angolan queen who stopped the slave trade for 30 years. 30 years
Wow.
She protected her people.
Man.
That's just amazing.
We had some fortresses over there.
Yes, I know, right? And so, African queen right here, wherever you are, powerful stuff. So today we're talking about Africa, the continent, and it's quite fascinating, the amount of facts and the amount of information that there is about Africa. Now, I want to start from the beginning, before 1885, there was a Berlin conference in 1885 where they actually divided Africa into tiny little countries. And it's quite fascinating to me how that came about, because we were just one people up until then.
Yeah, very interesting, Mwaba. You'll appreciate that slavery effectively ended in about 1865, global slavery. But colonization started around 1885. So there was that period of 20 years, which was a hiatus historically. And a lot is not known what was happening, but from a European point of view, people were looking into Africa as a new territory to go into for expansion and for business and so on and so forth. So what happened is then there was a build-up of this quest for African wealth. What's called Scramble for Africa. So that was in that 20-year period. And then, as you know, that wealth leads to wars and stuff like that. So countries in Europe started having altercations over, which territory should be taken by who. France is fighting with England and so on and so forth. And there was this king, the Belgian king called Leopold II,
Right.
who was somewhat related to the German emperor. And they decided perhaps the best thing is to get everybody together and have a chat about Africa.
Wow.
And the Berlin Conference is very interesting. You get all these European countries sitting together and having a chat about what should happen to Africa. None of Africans is there. None of us as Africans is there.
Present, yeah.
And they make a decision as to which country will take which portion. And they divided the whole continent into 54 countries. And that's what we know as Africa now. So the borders that we see in Africa are not our borders.
They're artificial borders.
They are artificial or European or foreign. If we want to get rid of African foreigners, we must erase those borders.
Get rid of that,
Exactly.
So
that's interesting. I mean, just the fact that someone else decided to say, okay, I'm going to carve out this land and it's mine or it's ours, and Zimbabwe was formed or Zambia was formed. It's like, okay.
How do they draw the lines and go like...
It's based on what though? Like what was the reasoning behind them even, like dividing them that way? Did they have an inkling as to where them, sort of minerals or anything? Yeah,
it's very interesting because at the same period where the missionaries had really exploited or explored Africa. As you may remember, the prominent one was Livingstone. So Livingstone was a hero in England and in the Western countries. Let me just give you a perspective. Who was the first man who went to the moon?
Armstrong,
Neil Armstrong.
Yep.
If you go to England now, you ask people who was Livingstone. He was the African explorer.
True.
But when you come to Africa and you ask Africans who was Livingstone, we all say he was a missionary. He was that good missionary.
I remember being forced to memorize a whole essay about Livingstone and how he came and how wonderful he was. I had to pass that, otherwise I didn't go to senior high.
So it was those explorers who were really exploring the whole continent, about the resources, the water, the land, the arable land, the fertile land, the natural resources, wildcatting, so looking for natural resources and so on and so forth, forests. And there was this concept of looking for the source of Nile. So this is what people were doing. And before you know it, around 1885, that exploration, most of the exploration was done around 1871, thereabout. So by that time, a lot was known about Africa.
Yep.
It was a question of how do we then divide this amazing wealth. So that was the idea.
Yeah, so it's interesting. So really, we blame those guys for the issue we have between Zimbabwe and Zambia as to who has the better view of the Victoria Falls.
Come on,
exactly.
It's like, dude, you should have just given that to Zimbabwe. Fully.
Okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to ask our audiences, we're going to ask our readers to take a trip once the virus is over, go to Zambia and go and see the magnificent Victoria Falls. By the way, on a serious note, if you've never been, make sure that is on your top priority list. Of things to see, and you will be amazed how wonderful it is looking at it from the Zambian side.
No,
it's interesting that you are talking about how good it looks, and you've forgotten it's called Victoria Falls.
Oh
it's funny because I was thinking, I was just about to raise that point and say it's called Victoria Falls, and I'm pretty sure where it is in your country, it's called isn't Livingstone the area?
No, Livingstone is the name of a city. The tourist destination.
Exactly.
And the Victoria Falls is not really meant to be the Victoria Falls. The actual native name is Mosi Otunya.
Yeah.
You know what? Funny enough, you see how interconnected we are. Let me tell you something.
Yeah.
Musiwa Tunya is actually a Sotho expression.
What does it mean?
To say there is a blowing smoke.
Yeah, the smoke that thunders.
Yes.
Is the actual translation of Mosi Otunya.
Yes.
They named a beer out of it.
Yes.
They named a beer. It's called Mosi Lager.
Okay,
There isn't a bad.
Have you had it before? Is that good?
I've had a tablespoon. Come on, my son may be watching. I had a tablespoon.
It's okay to have alcohol once in a while.
I don't know how anyone could get stuff
Only when
like
you're
that past their
18 though,
throat.
yeah.
But yeah, so they called it a beer. Actually, was developed after because it actually froths up really well. The Mosilaga. Any Zambian watching this will actually attest to the fact that once you pour that beer in there, it actually the falls. It's just you get a taste of the actual Mosi Otunya.
Okay,
And they call it
it's frothy.
the beer that thunders.
Wow.
So yeah.
Let me tell you something even more interesting.
Yes.
Is that there was a chief of Basotho called Sibitwan,
Yeah, it's a bit one.
who left during the war or the Difakane, and left to Botswana and the west of Zambia, and part of Namibia thereabout.
Yeah.
And these people were called Baluti, which would mean the
Lozi.
yes.
Yeah.
The original name for the Lozi is Baluti, which mean people who are circumcised.
Oh wow! How about that?
Yes, and so they moved to Zambia, and that's why it's called Musiwa Tunya. That's why it's got the name from further south.
Yeah.
It's because the Lozi settled around that area.
Oh, that's
Interesting.
interesting. I did not know that. Did you?
No, I did not know.
So
about
look,
that.
you're from Zimbabwe. Clearly, we've established that. I'm from Zambia, and you're from South Africa. Now, I want us to talk about in the books. You speak about Africa having more than 3,000 language dialects, and so out of curiosity, I would like us to chat about how many languages there are in your country, in mine and yours, and how many of those you can speak.
I'm always embarrassed by this topic because I think there are only two languages in Zimbabwe, like two official ones, Shona and Ndebele.
Right.
And I only speak Shona and non-Ndebele. So it's one of those things where like you think in a country with only just two languages, I should be able to at least speak some Ndebele, which actually makes me so sad because, if you go to South Africa, I think most people who speak Ndebele can understand, Xhosa or a little bit of that or maybe whatever else, Zulu, and so, it's a bit embarrassing. So
My son has a Shona name. You might like to know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What is it?
Takudzwa.
Oh, nice. Do you know what that means?
Shout out to TK.
What does it mean? Do you know
it means we have been honored.
Yeah, exactly.
wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You'd hope that the mother would know what the meaning of the child's name is.
That's the whole point why I named him that, is because I thought it was very interesting.
Nice.
Yeah.
I've met a lot of girls called Takudzwa.
Yes, actually, I say interestingly, he would love it. He would be embarrassed me talking about it this way because I met a 3-year-old girl who was called Takudzwa, and his dad was Zimbabwean and her mom was Zambian, and she was the most cutest, smartest little girl you've ever met. And I had, I think I was about 21, 22, and I was maid of honor at her aunt's wedding.
Yeah.
And so she just gravitated towards me, and I love kids, so we got along really, really well. And I fell in love with this little 3-year-old, and I told her that if I ever had a kid, I was going to call it Takudzwa.
Seriously?
Yeah.
Wow.
So she would be maybe about 28, 29 now. I should look her up.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
It's funny now that we're talking about names and everything, because even in the book as well, there's names. But I was just thinking about how, at least in Shona, all the names they're not gender specific. At least most of them are. As opposed to here, where you got girls and boys' name, the names there are just, which actually makes sense, right? Like they mean something, and therefore it's equally, meant for any gender, regardless of what you are. And I just had that, it's quite deep. Like, in this day and age, where we are sort of, not trying to, focus on, it's a girl. So, it should just be about the person, right?
That's right.
So that's interesting. Sorry. Yeah. So one language and English, I suppose, if you count that as a language.
Yeah. So two. So you're bilingual. That's
I am bilingual.
Great.
Yes.
That's great.
Yes.
And,
it's beautiful.
What about yourself? So you're from...
I come from a country with 11 official languages. There's
and
plenty
which country
more.
Is that?
South Africa, man. South Africa.
SA.
SA.
SA, yeah.
Hey, man, hey, our country. It's a conflicted country, but we're trying our best.
Yeah. So you
it's a
have
very
11
blessed
languages,
country.
yeah?
We've got 11 languages, and I speak quite a number.
Yeah, how many?
There is the Nguni side of languages, and then there's a Tswana or Sotho side of languages. Yeah. So I can understand both sides. Yeah. But then you've got a group of languages like Venda and Shangaan and that type of. Those ones I don't really understand. But Zulu, Xhosa, Sotho, Tswana, Sepedi. Maybe about 5 African languages, and then Afrikaans. I grew up in an African-speaking area. Yeah. Ek as 'n man van die platteland.
What did you just say?
I'm a man from. Well, it's an Afrikaans way to say I come from the plateau of South Africa.
Okay, that's good. As long as it's not swear word, because I don't think that's acceptable on this podcast, is it?
Oh, you can do whatever you want on podcast. But we're going to keep this PG because this is for everyone, right?
Yeah,
this is good.
That's right. We want the kids to learn about what we're talking about. Cool. Okay, so I'm from Zambia. We have about 73 different language dialects. So, I speak...
73?
73 different language dialects, and I speak about 2.5. And if you count English as a language, then 3.5.
Wow.
Yeah. So
that's good. No, actually, moving on into the book, into the I really want to talk about, because I actually did highlight that as well, because in terms of, you were talking about, for example, the rivers. So for those of you joining us, and hopefully you've watched the first episode. So episode 2, we are focusing on chapter 2 of this beautiful book, A New African History, Heritage and Legacy by Dr. Molapo Selepe. There's parts where you're talking about, the rivers and everything. So really, this whole book is an homage to Africa. It's about the beauty, the animals, the mountains, all the animals and everything. Like it's just amazing. And I remember, and there are parts of it where you'd mention a lake, for example, but you say it in English, but you say, for example, in here, in the middle of Lake Nyanza, not Lake Victoria. Like you're very much sort of making that point to say there's another name for it. What's your take, given how, we're now living in a situational period now where, people are tearing down statues that used to be there of oppressors, and we just lived through life without thinking. And now people have been thinking of putting a rebranding of even some notes where these people were slave owners and everything else. Like, what's your take on us renaming these, not just rivers, but like, streets, roads, buildings, monuments, all that stuff? Yeah.
Well, that in itself it's an expression, isn't it? We're saying something. Unfortunately, the way our approach has been, like, it's very violent. It's very violent. We want to just radically demolish everything that is colonial, and that speaks to our anger. It speaks to the pain that we have. But what tends to happen is that if you've been traumatized, then you become, in the subconscious mind, you become trauma yourself. If you've been violated, you become violence yourself. And so one of the signs that we really have been traumatized and violated, it is in our approach, how we get rid of this stuff. If I demolish Cecil John Rhodes' statue, it's out of anger, isn't it?
Absolutely.
But do I get my country back? Do I get my wealth back? No. Do I get my worth back? It is an expression of my anger and the violation to my identity. But I think in itself, it's very, I should not come across negative, because, I'm not against people who will go down and tear the statues, like what happened at my alma mater university. They tore down Cecil John Rhodes' statue. I guess, that's students, that's people do when they are students. But when you are really having the interest of the continent at heart, you really have to be quite systematic, and you have to be intentional in your planning towards restoring our worth. And you cannot do it violently. You cannot do it from a space of trauma. We really have to be intentional. And this is, this is what I've done in the book, is to try to paint a picture of how beautiful we are and how we can restore ourselves without necessarily being violent. Look, colonialism speaks to the evil of the regimes that set up colonialism. Because there was complete disregard for people in Africa. It was almost like people were treated as animals. Nations were disregarded, and if we're going to restore ourselves, we cannot do it the same way. We are not animals. So we can only do it in a way that is human, that is intelligible. And I've got this strong belief that we have what it takes as Africans to define ourselves and to really redirect our trajectory in terms of where we want to go. But it cannot be the same way that it used to be.
Absolutely.
That's right. Because, my dad always said that if you don't think you're being heard and you feel the rising need to yell in the hopes of being heard, don't do that. You need to think about changing the quality of your conversation or the quality of your message. And I think it goes without saying that information is power. No one can take away information once you've got it. And I think that as Africans, we have a duty and we have a responsibility. And you're showing us that we know so much has been passed on, but it hasn't been properly communicated to the world. And therefore, it is our duty to communicate that and intelligently so. Hence this podcast. Hello. So, we need to tell our own story. Remarkably so, evidence-based, as these books have shown us, that, there is, it's in the Guinness Book of Records that the first university ever in the world was in Africa. No one can argue with that. And so we just need enough people to know about this, and then they'll start respecting the fact that, okay, maybe there is a story that we haven't been told here. Maybe there is some information that we need to seek in order for us to understand.
Let me tell you something, Mwaba, which is very interesting. There's in Africa we believe in Ubuntu, which means Ubuntu means that I am because you are.
Yes.
But the thing about Ubuntu, it's a universal or global term from an African point of view. We respect every human being. Now, evidence shows, as we said in the book, evidence shows that all humans come from Africa. And there is something amazing, which is a common experience of all humans on earth. When you go to Africa, there is just this something. It's in your spirit. You don't even understand it. There is just this natural affinity with the land.
Yes. Regardless of who you are, by the way.
As long as you are a human being.
I've spoken to people who have gone to Africa. They are not born from Africa. They don't look like an African. They've just been on a holiday to Africa. And when they've come back, I was like, what was your experience like? They were like, I didn't want to come back. I just wanted to stay. So you're right.
And there's a lot of Americans, even predominantly African Americans now, who obviously, with everything happening, are feeling that disconnection with their own country. And so a lot of them are making the migration just to travel to Africa. And everyone that has gone always feels like, oh my gosh, for the first time I felt like I was home and I belonged and so it's really powerful just by being there. And they're not trying to, and these people aren't even just going on safaris and just going to see the lions. They are literally wanting to immerse themselves in the culture. So it does really paint a massive it's a privilege really when you think about it, really, to be able to be part of that and coming from a place where we know what that feels like.
Absolutely.
The thing about human DNA is that it's got a memory which is remarkable. You don't know where does your body get the memory that your nose is supposed to look like your grandfather's nose. No, I said grandmother's nose.
Wow. Sorry, Grandma.
But that memory is incredible. It's incredible. And there's so much that our DNA, there's so much information that our DNA carries.
Yeah.
And you see, it's humans' response to Africa that makes you aware that we all come from this continent. Even just the smell of the continent. Yes. People say the air there just smells so different. Why? Because it speaks somewhere to the DNA. Our blueprint, isn't it?
Yeah.
And animals, just look at animals, they just go around routinely as if they're home. It's like, what's happening to these animals?
Giraffe, that would have to be my favorite animal. Whenever we went to see animals and there was a giraffe, the elegance of the animal and how it slows down and looks at you as you take the picture and it's going like this. It's at home.
It's at home.
It's at home.
It's at home.
And
one of the things that moves me actually is when you go to the foot of Mount Kenya, my most favorite mountain in Africa, Mount Kenya. Mount Kenya is a natural safari itself. At the foot of the mountain, seasonally, because Mount Kenya is almost near the equator, so seasonally, the animals migrate. They go to the other side of the mountain and then they move back to the other side of the mountain. And humans and animals, wild animals, live together peacefully at the foot of Mount Kenya. It's incredible.
Yeah.
It's incredible. And you find all this mix of amazing animals, from elephants. I mean, just Google it. If you just say elephant at the foot of Mount Kenya, my goodness, I don't know, you almost get the original picture of what the Garden of Eden would be looking like.
Yeah. Wow, amazing. Now, Africa, I want to talk about the land size of Africa. You've written in your book here that it is the second largest continent. And what size is that? It's bigger than the land masses of China. Now think about this, guys. It's bigger than China, India, the United States, and Europe combined, put together. That's huge.
It's huge, man. It's
That is
huge.
massive.
It's huge. So that's 30 million square kilometers. The seas is 90 million square kilometers. So Africa is huge.
Massive. I can't even imagine how big that is.
And the map does not really
do
justice to it. And to add to that, Africa is only, African population, although it's 1.2 billion people, it's only 6% of the world population.
Wow.
It doesn't make sense now, because if the world population is
7 billion.
7 billion, no, it can't be.
No, it can't be.
Maybe 25%.
Maybe, yeah.
But Africa is a huge land, but the population is so minute comparable to other parts of the world. So it is still relatively very underpopulated, which means that there's so much that the world is actually benefiting from Africa. For instance, the major part of the world's lungs is Africa. The rainforests of Africa, they're not as vulnerable as the Amazon rainforest and the Indonesian rainforest. So by and large, a lot of the air that we breathe as a world, we are we owe our gratitude to Africa.
To Mother Africa.
These are the rainforests in the Congo, I think, where you're talking about, right?
Yes.
Yeah, it's just we forget about that. Actually, it's funny because if I hear the term rainforest, the first thought that I'm thinking of is Amazon. Isn't that interesting? Like I always just think of Amazon rather than Congo has a rainforest. It's just a weird sort of thing. So it's funny,
Interestingly, the Congo River.
Oh, okay. I was just going to say, before you say Congo River,
yes.
do you know that our continent is the only continent on planet Earth? Two things which are amazing about Africa. Is the only continent that is divided, that has got 4 quarters of the world. So it's you have equator and green meridian coming together in Africa.
Yes.
So Africa is divided into four, and that's the only continent in the world.
Wow.
And another interesting fact is that Africa is the only continent that has got direct connection with the center of the world, center of the planet. Other continents are relatively just floating
around. So we're like the most grounded people.
Most
right?
Well,
about grounded.
we are. If you think that most continents drifted, when you talk about continental drift, so they drifted away from Africa. So Africa, there's a lot of even if you don't do research, there's just intuitive understanding.
Yeah, absolutely.
Humanity comes from Africa.
So I was just going to talk about the Congo River. That's the Congo River whose course traverses both south and north of the equator, which is to your point. And it is the river with the most powerful current in the world. Did you know this, Manny, before you read the book? Neither did I.
It's powerful,
isn't it?
There's torrents and cataracts and In fact, there's a big, huge dam. It's going to be the largest dam in the world that's been built in along the Congo River. It's interesting. People talk about the mouth of Congo River. That current is so powerful that you can actually see the sea. You can see the river going miles into the sea.
Wow.
Or you would think that the sea current would be stronger than the river.
That's amazing. That's just
amazing.
Great.
So I know we're talking about the population in Africa, and I think in your book you mentioned that the average age or medium age was about 19 years or so there. So obviously it's a very, very young population in terms of that. And you do quote, there's a quote in your book that says, Africa is calling her people back home, because I think a lot of people are going overseas and everything like that. And listen, we are here doing a podcast in Australia, in WA. We've obviously come from the motherland in Africa, and I think most of us really, if the country was more, countries where we've come from, we're way more established, I reckon we'll be happy to have stayed. I would say certain at least maybe just travel there for uni and then go back or come and visit and stuff. What do you think it would be what are your thoughts on that, on people coming back? I mean, what would need to happen for the talent that is absolutely here in Africa, here in Australia and other countries, to come back to the motherland?
Well, I think, first of all, I need to make a call. It's an earnest call. That, there are, I said, there's 1.2 billion Africans in the continent.
Yes.
There's about an extra 2-3 other countries outside Africa. That if you can take the African diaspora, gather them together, I think we make about 140 million people. So we can still form extra 3 other countries if you were to take all the people who've been disposed or displaced somewhat, or either through colonialism or slavery, you name it. So all of us, we belong to Africa. But I must re-emphasize that it's more than just African people who look like you and I, because from what we are saying, is that all humans come from Africa.
Absolutely.
And so who is an African? If you start from there, really an African cannot be a person because of the pigmentation of their skin.
No, yes.
Right?
It's got to go far beyond
Deeper
that.
than that.
My most iconic politician ever was Robert Sebukwe, South African politician who started the Sharpeville massacre in 1960. the only man to be incarcerated in South Africa, solitary confinement by parliamentary decree. So it was agreed by parliament that the man is too dangerous to be out there. So he was silenced completely. You cannot hear his voice anywhere, his thoughts, his plans. He was completely muzzled. But the most amazing mind coming out of South Africa. Mm-hmm. But he said something amazing, Robert Sebukwe. He said, there is only one race, and that is the human race. Yeah. And this is a man who was living or who witnessed the build-up of apartheid. And so I think the call is to all people in the world to look back at motherland, that it is our responsibility to rebuild this amazing continent.
Absolutely.
It doesn't matter what your color is. It just depends where your heart is.
Yeah.
If your heart tells you that there is injustice that's happening in Africa, it's time that we actually start to rebuild. Yeah. So I would appeal to everybody to start thinking about how we can, I mean, the imbalance in the world is just astonishing. Yeah. And to think that we've got enough resources and enough know-how to make sure that everybody lives happily.
Yeah.
Yes, I would make that appeal that it's important to start to be thinking about your 5-year plan, 10-year plan, even 50-year plan.
Yeah. I mean, when you look at the resources you're talking about, I think you mentioned that it's about just the minerals alone. I think it's a 60 trillion. Just in there, you just go like, wow, that's a lot of money there.
It's amazing. So, look, we can never exhaust African treasure. No, we can never. And smart people are going
Absolutely.
there.
Well, sorry guys, we have to. I know we are getting into this, and we want to keep the conversation going, but we're going to cut to a short break. And when we come back, we'll go in and have some more conversations. So see you in a bit.
Cheers.
Hey guys, welcome back to part 2 of this second podcast, a new African podcast, which we're really excited about. Honestly, the information I'm learning and stuff about is just absolutely amazing, and the conversation,
mind-blowing, right?
Great,
mind-blowing stuff. We should find something that goes when your mind is blown by some information. You go like or something.
Yeah. Maybe the editor can put like little emojis.
That's the one. Yes. There you go. I was looking for that.
Yes.
That's the one we want. Yes.
That's a mind-blowing button. So if anybody's mind gets blown, just have me do
that one. Yeah, that's good.
That one, great. Yeah. So look, before we went off on a break, we were talking about Lake Nyanza. Not Lake Victoria, because I think many of us know that as Lake Victoria, but no, it's actually called Lake Nyanza. And I will just read this out to you. Please get the books, because there is more information in these books than what we can talk about in a podcast. But this, I couldn't go past this. I've highlighted it, I've underlined, I've colored 3 different colors here. So Lake Nyanza, not Lake Victoria, is the largest tropical lake in the world, not just in Africa, in the world. While the Nile River is the longest river in the world. The Sahara Desert is the world's hottest desert. The Namibia Kalahari Desert is the oldest desert on earth. And all this is in Africa. Africa is a natural habitat to the Big 5. The African elephant is the world's largest land animal. The cheetah is the world's fastest land animal, and the giraffe is the tallest land animal. Now that's like mind-blowing stuff, right?
We might need to remove that button from her.
That's not so many great things. I mean, if you never needed a reason to go to Africa, I mean, that's just it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The amount of like firsts and sort of things in Africa that you just go, there's so much greatness to the continent. It's really amazing.
Yeah.
You know, it's very interesting because when Europeans came to Africa, all of them were speaking one language. They wanted to find the source of the Nile.
Yeah.
And even up to today, the source of the Nile is still debatable.
Wow, it's still a mystery.
Man, it's a mystery. It's a complicated, connection of rivers. The parts of African lakes drain into the Congo River, and they end up in the Atlantic Ocean. And parts, of the African lakes end up in the Lake Nyanza. They all join together. In fact, at the bottom of Nile River is Lake Nyanza. And then from there, it goes all the way into the Mediterranean Sea via Sudan and Egypt. The last parts of African waters like Tanganyika and Malawi and all those, they end up in Zambezi and they flow into the Indian Ocean. It's a beautiful, it's a beautiful connection of natural waters. But what's interesting is that the source of Nile, people have tried to find it. And it's very debatable. But somewhat, Lake Nyanza seems to be the center of it. But you can trace all sorts of tributaries into the lake that go as far as some places. At the far end, you can trace the waters. It's into places like Burundi, some parts of Uganda, and so on and so forth. So it's very interesting. So Lake Nyanza is it's an incredible body of water because that's really the source of the Nile.
And you had some more.
Yeah, because it's interesting because this is one part that I found very fascinating about this particular part.
Is it one of these?
Yes, it's because it's for part of Lake Nyanza is one of the tiniest and most controversial islands. I suppose within Africa. Really, I didn't even know anything about this Migingo, which so I actually was reading this and I was like, what? Because apparently, so you wrote that it was only but a peaking rock in the 1990s, like so, and then obviously I'm assuming maybe global warming and stuff like the water has receded. And now it's an island half the size of a soccer pitch or something rather. And so I was just thinking, it's a very small island. So I was thinking, well, how do people live there and stuff? Right? Like, because people would have just one house on that size land. So I had to look, and you put a picture on there, but albeit it's black and white, so I had to go into the internet, and I got lost. It's okay. You need to Google this island. Seriously, Migingo, like it is nothing. So it's all tin sheds. Just to give you a picture, it's literally tin sheds that are basically put together in this little thing. The reason why people went on there is because there's fish, and so the farm it's called Nile perch, which is like African barramundi.
That's the tastiest fish.
Oh, is it really?
One of.
Oh wow.
Oh yeah.
Do you know? I did feel like, oh my gosh, like I'm craving fish now because there were pictures of the. I was like, it looked fresh and stuff. I'm like, oh my gosh, this would be great. So apparently, because of all the feeding and everything, this is like there's a lot of fish, and so people have gone there for fishing. And I think that it was barely uninhabited till basically the early 2000s, when really that's when people started coming there and doing that. But I mean, this place, y'all, it's got there's pubs on this little thing. There's a pharmacy, and the funniest thing that I learned is there are several brothels. I was like, wow, because of this. Yeah, please. Now that's where I'll put that thing. I feel like I should do this. Yes.
For brothels, guys.
Yeah. No, not for several. On this tiny island.
Yeah, well, it's because a man from Uganda, he spent years, months on far from home.
Can we just change?
There is just a lot happening on that one.
This is escalating.
All I'm just saying is you need to just look at the pictures, see it. But the funny thing is, it's actually a border issue between Kenya and Uganda.
Yeah.
So, this little tiny island, people are having fights. Like the ministers are getting involved. The president, the police are there. They had police army on this tiny little.
Is it because of the fish or the brothels? Now I'm really.
It's the fish.
I know. It could be one of the
if you can see the pan in the fish.
Yeah, it's wow. Anyway, so this is I was really surprised about that. And so what actually made you even just come up as you're doing the research for the Nyanza thing? Is that because it's honestly one of those things that is so fascinating, and I would never have heard of it anyway.
Yeah.
Yes, it came as I was doing the research on that area.
Yeah, okay.
I'm really fascinated by the Great Lakes of Africa.
Yeah, okay.
I have not been there, but I've transported myself in my mind a lot. It's a fascinating part of the world.
Yeah.
When I was doing the research in there, I found this thing.
Yeah.
This rock, which has really in so many ways represented Africa.
Absolutely. This is why I was so fascinated, because it's such a small little thing, but it represents a lot of what's going with the continent in itself. I think you mentioned that most of it is controlled by Western powers. The resources, the fishermen are getting all this fish and sending them overseas, but they obviously don't even have good contracts involved.
Exactly.
So there's a lot happening for this little tiny sized island on there. So anyway,
so much to learn from it.
There's so much,
Well, so just to wind up, I guess, I wanted to read a little bit, because like some of this information, as we're saying, they're mind-blowing stuff, right? So you write, part of the concluding of the chapter 2, is that to appreciate the grandiosity of the motherland, which is Africa, one has to visit Africa.
Okay.
And see the tallest and breathtaking summits. We've got the Mount Kilimanjaro, Tanzania, at the elevation of 5,895 meters. That is tall. It is Africa's highest peak. It is the king of the mountains in Africa. Capped with glaciers and snow, it is the world's highest freestanding mountain. Aiming high, 6 of Africa's most epic mountain climbs. Mount Kenya, which is your favorite, is a spellbinding 5,199 meters tall summit, the second highest summit on the continent, yet the most intriguing. So people, you've got to go and see this. Like I can't emphasize enough.
Mount Kenya is beautiful, man.
Right?
Beautiful. It looks like the Swiss Alps, but better.
Better.
With the
It's
animals
African.
there,
Hello.
with with that swag.
Yeah.
It's crazy, man. It's just beautiful.
Well, on that note, beautiful Africa. It's been obviously. Thank you guys for joining us again on the podcast number 2.
Yes.
As you can see, we are getting into the book. Next episode will be on chapter 3 of the book,
Yeah.
A New African, which is on African privilege.
Yes.
So that'll be quite. That's gonna be a hot one. That
I
one.
think this would have to be my favorite chapter in this book.
It is by
It is
far.
my favorite. Is it your favorite
It's
too?
my favorite.
There you
Oh
go.
my God.
There
You
go.
have to come back and watch our next episode, episode 3,
Yes.
on African privilege. I know you've heard about other privileges, We're talking about African privilege in our next episode. How cool is that?
Yes, absolutely. So
Awesome.
please,
Awesome.
the details of the podcast are, as you can see, the details where you get the book, are in the comment section or
Yep.
just below. I don't know where the screen will be.
Subscribe
so you don't miss anything at
Yeah.
all. Again, it's been a pleasure having you here, Dr. Molepo, as always.
Yeah.
Thank you, man. Thank you, guys.
Been
It's been
blowing our
amazing.
minds.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.
No
Great,
worries.
it's been
Beautiful.
fantastic.
See you guys in the next episode.
See
Cheers.
ya.
Well, thank you so much for tuning in and enjoying the episode with us. We really enjoyed being with you. Please don't forget to subscribe and click a notification button.